really your assignments are going to be generated from your group and not from me for the next couple weeks for this newspaper project.
Are we going to find out our groups today?
Yes, you'll find out your groups today, but that's toward the end. First, I want to go through some of the parts of the newspaper, some of the guidelines that you'll need to have for your specific group's newspapers, and we'll look at some examples from last year too, okay? And we'll answer any questions you have and all of that so that you can go right into your groups at the end and start the article assignments and everything, okay? Andy, why don't you check agendas real quickly? I'm going to give each of you a newspaper. It's yesterday's paper, and we're going to look at the different parts very quickly. Going to help me pass out? When you get this, stay on the front page. You'll have a couple minutes as we talk to go through the different parts of this. And you need to pay careful attention to what this newspaper looks like. I think sometimes we take for granted what a newspaper looks like, but we need to keep in mind the specific parts and all of the little details that you want to put on your paper. The only difference is your group newspapers are going to address issues of Lewis and Clark students. So it's not going to be addressing worldwide issues unless on the editorial page you want to address something that's happening in the world that affects you that you want to talk about. So the only difference between this newspaper and your group's newspaper is the idea that it will address Lewis and Clark issues, things that are happening at school, things that have happened throughout the year. Here you go. So it's going to be more teenager-centered than adult-centered, although many of you write and speak like adults anyway. Okay, on the front page, which is where you should be, there are different requirements on the front page that you need to have. The top area is called the flag, and you need to come up with the title of your own newspaper. You can't steal one, but you can take some of the words that are commonly used in newspapers that you've heard before and put your own individual twist on it. So who can give me a title of a newspaper besides Omaha World Herald? Leo?
Chicago Tribune.
Sure, the Chicago Tribune. You could use the word Tribune in there and put an individual, whatever group name you want to put on there. Can you give me another name of a newspaper, Jason?
The New York Times.
The New York Times, good. You could have the Lewis and Clark Times or, whatever else you want. Becky?
The Jewish Press.
The Jewish Press. Press is a good word to use, okay? There are all kinds of newspapery sounding words that you can use in your title, okay? So be thinking of a title too. And then notice the other things at the top. What do you see at the top? Leo?
The two main topics of the day.
Okay, the two main topics of the newspaper for that day. Good. Andy?
The date?
The date, of course, you'd want to have on there. The price, 25 cents. You can up the price if you feel your newspaper is worthy. Jono?
I don't get this. If this is going to be a couple of week project, how are we going to do this?
How are you going to complete it in 2 weeks?
How are we going to do this?
Well, the date you'll plan ahead. You'll know when the deadline is. That'll be the date, okay? But you'll cover things that have gone on all year. It'll work, okay? And then you'll also see a couple of pictures at the top. For photos in your newspaper, you're going to illustrate them or draw them, okay? If you do have a photo that you want to use of an actual event here at Lewis and Clark, maybe of yourself in track or soccer or something, or in the play or the musical, you can certainly use that in your newspaper, okay? Otherwise, draw it. You don't want to cut things out of the newspaper and paste it on there, though. This has to be your creation, okay? Jonathan?
How long is this newspaper supposed to be?
I'm going to give you a sheet of guidelines, and it has requirements such as 3 news stories, 2 editorials, things like that. Most of the papers from last year were 4 sides altogether. However, you can put another insert in there and make it 6, okay? All right, now let's continue looking on just the front page. And what are the bold-faced letters? You know what those are called? At the top of the articles, James?
Headline.
Headlines. You'll need to have a headline for each article that your group writes, okay? Are headlines necessarily complete sentences?
No.
No, they can be very short phrases, but they always have an action verb in there, okay? So what is the headline that you see here? Give me one of them on the front page. Melanie?
Lifelong ties on Hanscom Boulevard.
Good. Lifelong ties forged on Hanscom Boulevard. Good. And then the other one, Andy?
White House offers a deal on tax cuts.
Good. White House offers to deal on tax cuts. So you have to make sure that you have a catchy, action-packed headline for each article. Okay? Underneath the headline, let's look at the White House one. Everyone on the White House article? White House offers to deal on tax cuts. Then it says Republicans see Democrats as irrelevant. Well, underneath that it says Washington and then AP in parentheses. Who can tell me what the AP stands for? Jonathan?
Associated Press.
Associated Press. And then before the AP it says Washington. Well, that tells you where this article is coming from, okay, where it's coming out of. That's called, the Washington and the AP, that's called the dateline, which is kind of weird because there's no date on there, but that's what they call the dateline, okay, the place, Washington. Now, over on the Lifelong Ties article, where it says Lifelong Ties forged on Hanscom Boulevard, there's no dateline, okay, there's no place that it's coming out of, but what do you see right under the headline? Becky?
Who it's written by?
Who it's written by. Chris Burbach of the World Herald staff, okay? And that's called the byline. Now that one's easy to remember because you just think, well, who it's by, right? That's the byline. Each of your articles for your newspaper must have a headline and a byline. Who wrote it, okay? And that would be your name in there. All right, what else do you see on the front page? Jamie?
An article about AIDS.
Okay, article about AIDS. And next to that, to the left, this I would like to see on all of your newspapers too. It says Inside Today, and it just gives you a brief rundown of what you'll find in that day's issue. Okay, so include that on your front page. That's a nice thing to see. Marcia?
The index.
Okay, the index, exactly. You'll want one of those on the corner of your paper somewhere too. The index, okay? All right, so that's the front page. And that will have regular news stories. The only difference is there will be Lewis and Clark stories and not, worldwide news stories, okay? Find the sports section. Yeah. You guys get to have a sports section in your paper. There it is. However, the sports that you cover will be Lewis and Clark sports. Okay? And then when you really work for Omaha World Herald, then you can work in the sports department. For this paper, we're going to cover Lewis and Clark sports. So some of your interviews might include the coaches, right? You could go down and talk to the coaches. You could talk to members of the different teams and cover as many sports as you can that have happened throughout the year. So don't forget soccer and some of the things that were toward the beginning of the year. And then you can cover track, baseball, basketball, all of those things. Okay, Jason?
On the front page of the sports page down the side, there is a spot where people can write in. Can we ask kids to write in, what they think of our sports here?
Sure, sort of the voice from the grandstand type thing. Yes, you can have classmates write in. You can write your own opinions in, okay, in that. So sure, you can have a column like that. And then for pictures, again, you can use your own photos if you have any. Otherwise, just illustrate them. Actually, last year, some people had real classifieds. Somebody's cat had kittens, and so they actually put an ad in their paper, free kittens, call this number, and I think they got rid of a couple that way. Jono?
Can we do like that one thing where you yelled at that one lady for what she said about the school?
Good point. Yelling at the lady. You mean responding to the woman about the gifted program? Okay, yes, we'll cover that. The editorial page. Good question. Yes, you can do editorials, and we're going to do that in just a second. Jonathan?
Are we going to be able to, once we're done with the newspaper, can we deliver it out to everybody?
You know what? We don't have time to do a press run. You'll have one copy of your newspaper, but we will have a day where we share them, and we can have the other class come in, and you can all look at each other's newspapers. Okay? A couple more sections I want to cover. Go to the living section, please. Find the living section in there. The living section is fun. You'll have a couple of requirements for this type of section. On the front, you see a feature article. That means you pick someone here at school that you would like to do an interview with. You can do sort of an illustration of that person, and then you conduct an interview and you write about that person, sort of a character sketch, but it's real. Okay? Now, if you want to interview someone, there are a couple of requirements or a couple of things to keep in mind that I would ask you to do. Here's what you don't do. If you are interviewing Mr. Bugs, you don't run up during the passing period. Mr. Bugs, can I ask you a question? Don't do that, okay? You need to go up to him at a convenient time and say, my name is, I'm working on a class newspaper. Is there a time that would be convenient for us to meet so that I can ask you a few questions? If he says yes, he'll give you a time that you can come back and see him. And you can go ahead and tell him you can use any of the class time that you're normally in here, and I'll write a few passes and you can go down and do these interviews. Okay, so if he has a planned period or some extra time, or whoever it is that you're interviewing has some extra time during the time that you're in here, that's fine. Go ahead and set it up for that time. I'll write you a pass. You can go down and do your interview. What you would want to take with you is what?
A pencil and paper.
Okay, pencil and paper so that you're not just going down there and winging it. And I want the questions written out ahead of time so that I can just glance at them, and also so that it goes more smoothly and more quickly, so that you go down there, you know what you're going to ask him or her, and you write down the answers, because you can't remember, okay? Or if you want to take a little tape recorder, that's fine too, like you see on TV. Excuse me. And you can tape record the interview too, okay? And then what would you say when your interview is finished? Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, for talking to me. And a really nice thing to do is then to give that person a copy of your article. That's really nice to do so that they can see, or at least bring the paper down when it's done and show that person what the final product is. That's always a nice thing to do too.